And now there's not a smooth transition here, but we jump into another concept that the coffee pot's really great for teaching. And what this is this is the hopper at the back of the big coffee maker, the automatic espresso maker. So you pour beans into it, and it pulls beans from the bottom of the chute. And this is really the first in, first out concept. And the alternative would be if you think about having a bin where you're grinding coffee and filling a bin. If you're doing a batch process, and you fill a whole bin with ground coffee, and then you scoop it out of the top of the bin to fill up your filter inside of the removable part for the drip coffee maker. You're constantly pulling from the top and scooping and refilling at the top, so you get this first in, last out philosophy, or last out system going, where the coffee grounds on the bottom of that pile can sit there forever. Now think about that in a warehouse, Tim. What happens in warehouses when you get new stock in?
Sure. I mean, this has a lot of applications. I mean, it's a good practice, obviously, to move your inventory, but you may actually have some critical elements in your organization that are sensitive to expiration dates or best used by. If you're in the food industry, obviously, you would know these kind of dates very clear. But you have this with chemicals as well. Things have a shelf life, a predetermined amount of time that they can be utilized. So. There are a lot of different ways to set up a FIFO system, from lanes to flow systems. In this case, you can kind of consider this coffee grinder as some sort of flow system. You have a bin, and as you fill, obviously, it's a first in, first out system. So there are a lot of applications in your organization to use these techniques.
And the challenge with a first in, first out system is you need access on both ends of it. So if you think about like a warehouse where you have shelves put back to back or against a wall, if you fill it up, you push it against the back. And this goes back to that people thing again. Is if you create a system that makes it hard for people to do first in, first out, they're not going to do it. So you got to work together with the teams and make it so that the path of least resistance is the behavior you want people to follow. And this is as a lean implementer, but as a team member, you want your job to be easy, and you want to have no frustration in it. You want to be able to go in there and know exactly which piece you can grab. And what are some ways that you use? You talked about the lanes, and I think you already mentioned this, but I'll reiterate that you talked about the lanes where you put something in the back end and it moves it to the front. And great ways to do this is with gravity. You make an inclined plane and stuff slides to the bottom, and you use rollers or anything like that. You can really get some.
Yeah, we use that a lot in our assembly production areas, in which we'll have some sort of angled, tray or trough of some kind that will feed the parts to the next operation. And so, by default, because of the angle and the gravity, like you say, you are getting that first in, first out. I think it's important to note, though, here that Lean, we try to flow products, and FIFO is doing exactly that. It's defining that predetermined set of rules in which you're going to move an item from one area to the next. In this case, it's from the top of the coffee grinder to the bottom, but you may have that in much further processes. So if you can't do FIFO, the next element you're going to look to is to try to pull.
And just going to point, I just had a question from Kumar V, I believe. My screen's a little hard. I got to figure out some of the the continuous improvement. So, but it looks like it's Kumar V, and he's asking if we can get a copy of this presentation out. So we'll go ahead and post this afterwards, and it might take a day or two to get it out, but we'll both send out some notice that'll let you know when the presentation's posted if you want to use that. And we're going to get a actual copy of the recording up somewhere. And again, we're still working on some technical, the technical processes and how to do this. But yeah, we'll be able to get you copies of this for you to be able to use. So the next step, once you start getting that flow going, is how do you signal that you're ready to build, that you need something from the upstream process. So what are some examples of how you do that, Tim?
Well, I think just to lead into this a little bit, with the coffee grinder, there's a fixed size. You can't obviously flow more in than you need. So you are determining basically the level of whip that you're willing to take in your process. And if you can't flow, Then you go to the pull system, which we're talking about here. And I think the important thing is to kind of note, is we use this technique a lot in our businesses, but sometimes we jump to the pull system rather than looking at the flow system first. So I think that's why we put a lot of emphasis into this flow first. But to kind of reiterate, in this case, you really have a situation in which, as you want to brew the coffee for the single cup, you're going to grind the beans at that time. So really what's occurring here is when you go to run the coffee machine, it'll send a signal that you need to grind more beans for the next cup that you're going to brew. That's really an example of a pull system that you would see in your process between two process steps.
I like what you said there, and it's one of those lessons that, it's a really easy lesson to forget, is that flow is the ultimate, goal of your production processes. You want things to move quickly, cleanly, easily, on demand, right when they're needed. And I think that the whole concept of pull, and using Kanbans as pull or any kind of buttons or signals or anything, that those are all workarounds. So people look at a Kanban as a good thing, but the truth is a Kanban is a signal that you can't create flow in that situation, because when things flow, you don't need a Kanban signal. It just comes to you. And I think we got to get into that concept of, the mindset of, pull is a workaround and it's the best alternative we know right now, but flow is better. And Kanbans are good, but flow is better.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I think we're covering that kind of order. But in some cases you can't. So, in this case, we can't store an infinite number of beans in a place, and when we push the button, it's ready to go. So there is some sort of replenishment in this process manually because of the size of the coffee machine, really, that we want. Because we all have a small space in our kitchen to put the coffee machine, and that's where we're going to put that. So because of space limitations, in this case, we will have some sort of pull signal. And so as you go to brew the cup of coffee, this sends a signal to replace fresh beans, in this case, grind the beans into coffee that you're going to drip.
And the trick in lean is just to keep challenging those assumptions, and constantly there's those feelings of people say, this is how we have to do it, this is how the world works, and then FedEx and UPS come along, and suddenly you can get things quicker in smaller quantities for relatively cheap price, and those are game changers. Those are things where you can suddenly start carrying less inventory, and you get many things happen that start tearing down those obstacles. And again, you just keep getting to that thought of the ultimate goal is flow, and what is keeping you from getting to that flow, and then that's what you countermeasure. That's what you go after. Oh, I went too far. So what this is here is a visual indicator, and this is a bypass on the hoppers. You can take ground coffee, dump it into that automatic coffee maker, and use a different blend if you want to. And the alternative would be you'd have to clear out your hopper of beans that are in there and drop in fresh beans, and you have to run it once and do that changeover to get to the next type of bean. But this way is an easy way just to use a one-off production process. But that's not the big learning point. The learning point here is the visuals. What I just said is a lot more complicated than what you're seeing here right now. So I haven't talked to Tim about this one before. So Tim, how many scoops do you put in here?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? What you're trying to get at, really, I think, is the standard work element here. And so while these visuals have some element of standard work, it's not maybe 100% complete, right?
Right, yeah. But go with that. What do you mean by that?
So, in this case, while it gives you some indication of how you can use the coffee pot, it doesn't give you necessarily instruction on how you brew a cup of coffee. Per se, because in this case, there's built-in, flexibility. People like their coffee different strengths and different, maybe even types of coffee. So there's some flexibility in that. But what you would see in the workplace is some sort of visual standard. You might have these low-key mistake-proofing devices, but you would also have some sort of standard work. How many cups of coffee do you put in? How many cups are you going to brew? In this case, a single cup. What is the sequence of buttons you would push for flavor? Do you warm the cup first? Do you not? How long is the water heat? These are all things and elements that you would put in to your standard work.
And the visuals just make your job easier. So and you can even think, color coding is another type of visual that you'll see, and it happens a lot when you have a production process that has various models that come through it. Where you might have, like, the Model A is coded green and the Model B is coded purple or something like that. And it's just a way of making it easier for people to recognize that. So you start taking the standard work that Tim talked about and building it into the process steps. And again, this goes back to that PDCA cycle. The point where you need visual instructions is most commonly the point where people have had mistakes before. And a high number of mistakes is an indicator of a poor process, not poor employees. So when you find more mistakes, as a leader, you know to go into that location and fix the problem. And as an employee who's doing that process, you know to bring light to it. You need to start recording it if you see something. Because people on the front line, those are the ones who have the best knowledge about lean. There's there's leaders who can get in there and see things once in a while and kind of see the output, but the people who are actually doing the process regularly are the ones who are the best positioned to come up with good ideas.
Yeah, I like your example on the color coding. That's used a lot actually in the coffee process, and anywhere from the type of coffee you use. Obviously, the biggest clear visible would be the decaf and the regular coffee, but you find that in the flavored coffees, the color coding, single cup brewing, so you can clearly pull out which one you want, and of course, whether you use regular sugar or equal or some other variety, they're all color coded. So these are all elements you're trying to create that visual instruction of what's needed, so you don't make a mistake and use the wrong raw material.
Exactly. And again, visual instructions are kind of like gauges. They're good. The best thing is poka-yokes to prevent you from making a mistake. So